You might be sitting there, my gosh, I wish my tour leaders would do all these things, but how do I actually get them to do that? Hi there, Kelsey Tony here, the founder of Guest Focused Tour Business Coaching, where every day myself and our team of talented tour and activity business coaches are helping you build a thriving, profitable business. In this series, we're looking at how to design an experience that guests will never forget, a series of best practices for consistently creating unforgettable tours, activities, and experiences. Across this series, we're sharing practical templates, frameworks, and tools, and as always, sharing best practices from some of the world's most successful tour and activity businesses. In today's video, we're exploring how to personalize on your tours, activities, and experiences. How can we make each guest feel like they're being catered to, or that it's a unique experience for them, while still managing group dynamics? As you'll see, this varies quite a bit depending on the nature of your tour. Let's get started. Private and custom tours offer the most flexibility, where we can completely adapt our route or the content to our guests' interests and even real-time preferences. But group day tours require more subtle approaches to personalization, as well as multi-day tours, which we'll address in a moment. A key insight here is that this road to personalization starts well before guests arrive. With modern booking and reservation software, it's entirely appropriate to ask questions after they've made the reservation. Things like, of course, dietary restrictions or allergies, as is relevant, but more importantly, ask if they're celebrating anything, or is there anything important to know about their group? Do they have any particular goals or objectives for their trip? Of course, it's one thing to ask and collect this information, but it's another thing entirely to train your team to actually use this information proactively in that 15 to 20 minutes before the tour. What a great high level of personalization to have a tour leader proactively come up to you, confirm a dietary restriction, to maybe congratulate them on a particular celebration, or even to highlight, hey, I see here that you're interested in shopping for this particular type of souvenir. I'm going to let you know some of my favorite stops or stores as we go through the tour. Wow, what a really wonderful way to personalize leveraging technology. For effective personalization on group tours, we're often talking about setting ourselves up for success ahead of time. Preparation is key. Here's some additional best practices for inspiration. I remember leading a particular tour where I had pre-printed a number of different handouts that focused in on 4 or 5 different layers. Like one might have been more information about the national park and some of the key figures that led to that creation. Another one was maybe on flora and fauna. Another one might have been related to shopping opportunities and souvenirs. And maybe another one was a restaurant guide or handout. Now, the way that this worked in practice is that we weren't gathering everybody up and just giving everyone every single handout. But now, out of my tour leader backpack, I could personalize that experience of like, hey, here's some more information on some of those souvenir shops, and here's some of my favorite places to go. Or, hey, I saw you were interested in some of the wildlife that was here. Here's some additional information on some of the species that we can see here in the park. Or maybe you hear about that they're going on a hike and the next day, hey, here's some local walks or some of my favorite recommendations. Back in the day when maps were a lot more common or a lot more essential, I would gather up a number of these and just have them in my backpack. And sometimes I would get them from the hotel or a tourist information center, but it allowed me in those down moments of the tour, before, afterwards, or maybe during a bathroom break, to actually open up that map and give some personalized recommendations right there. Now, with modern technology, we can even do this on individuals' phones if they're open to it. Hey, let me drop a pin or highlight a specific stop that you might want to check out after the tour. Finally, even on a fairly structured tour, you can create moments where you're giving people choices. Well, what's going to resonate to the most? This might be pulling up to a look off. You can say, hey, here's the best spot to go and grab a photo. But what about people who aren't interested in that photo, or maybe just want to have a quick look off and then do something else? What additional options can you give them, from checking out maybe souvenirs or highlighting where a bathroom break is, or most importantly, sometimes just saying, or I'll be available to answer any more specific questions you have about anything that we've covered. Let's take a moment to talk about multi-day tours. On longer tours, we can build in the same kind of choose your own adventure days or morning or afternoon experiences. When I was leading active travel trips with Backroads, I loved that we had different options for the day where you could push yourself and go for a longer hike or a longer bike ride, or you could do a shorter challenge by choice, which ultimately gave you the feeling of agency over your vacation. We also started going out of our way to highlight recommended times to relax or potentially opt out of an activity. On multi-day tours, we can sometimes overschedule our guests, and people ultimately say, well, gosh, I need a vacation from my vacation. So if there's a natural time where it might make sense for people to skip an activity and go back and enjoy one of the special hotels or locations in which you're staying, don't be afraid to call that out more explicitly and empower people to make that choice. On your own, dinners and lunches are a great element to add to a multi-day tour activity or experience. Many multi-day tour designers are nervous about having something that they're going to have to pay for on their own. Don't we want this to be an all-inclusive experience? But what you're denying people is the opportunity to create their own special memories. Yes, we want to set them up for success with some recommendations, and whenever possible, personalized recommendations for where they can eat or have a great experience. But on every single multi-day adventure that I've designed, we always have at least one on your own lunch and one on your own dinner over the course of a week. Now, part of this is ultimately empowering and training your tour leaders and activity hosts to be proactive with guests. And especially in that multi-day context, keep in mind that hotel concierge and receptionists can be a great ally. Here's an example. When we were going down to a tour in Costa Rica, there was a family that was clearly a birding family. It was a mom, a dad, and a teenage daughter. And they were really into all the hummingbirds and incredible biodiversity in some of the jungles we were staying. And so I reached out to talk to the front desk and said, hey, do you have any local birding guides? Is it possible that they might be open to having a private birding experience, let's say in the morning? And this was happening before our scheduled tour. Anyway, we got back, just a quick phone call, and we got a price. And I essentially offered it to that particular family. Said, hey, I just talked to the front desk, not sure if you guys would be interested, but here's one option over the next 2 days that we're going to be staying at this hotel. Well, it turns out that was a massive hit. They were so appreciative and didn't even know or hadn't even considered that that might be an option. Being proactive like that with your service, but not forcing people to do things, but empowering them to make the choice themselves, giving them agency over their perfect holiday is the win-win we're looking for. What about storytelling and the content of your tour? We strongly encourage you to personalize the tour, to adapt and change what you share depending on who is on the tour. That's why in our coaching program, we recommend a story vault. We have a collection of different stories that can be adapted to different groups and to different interests. If you know that John and Susie are from Canada and there's a great Canadian connection to one of your sites or one of your stops, we encourage you to lean into that connection and even call it out in real time. That type of personalization of contact can be really impactful. If you know that somebody's especially passionate about architecture, you don't necessarily have to share that story in front of the entire group, but maybe on that bathroom break or afterwards, you could highlight, oh, I've got a great story, or I've got something I think you'll really be interested in. Another key reason that we love stories is that they can be adapted, i.e. you can make them longer or you can make them shorter depending on what's happening in real time. If we start to see our group losing interest or their body language is communicating, hey, we're kind of over this or not particularly interested in that story, we can wrap things up once we understand that story arc and how to have a satisfying climax and conclusion to that story. But boy, oh boy, we can move quickly through content in real time if we see that it's just not resonating. So as you can imagine, here at Guest Focus, we're not huge fans of overly scripted tours where almost word for word, this tour is going to be the same no matter who is on it. That type of personalization of the content is what sets aside a really memorable experience and a really talented tour activity or experience guide. Yes, we're going to put a lot of thoughtful design into each one of these elements. Yes, we might even script some of those really important intros and outros, but we want to empower our guides to be flexible with the stories and content that they share depending on who is on that tour. The goal isn't to run separate, unique experiences for every guest, but to make everyone feel specially catered to, appreciated, and acknowledged as much as possible. Most memorable tours combine structure with flexibility, group experiences with that personal attention. It's about creating tiny moments where each guest thinks, wow, they did that just for me. A best practice here is to build in specific times on your tour activity or experience where the facilitator, the host, is actually taking the time to individually check in with guests, or at minimum, check in with their group, their family, or who they booked with. This creates that feeling of caring about each individual on tour. It creates the opportunity when we're at a bathroom break midway through the tour asking, hey, I just want to check in, make sure you guys are having a great time, and see if you had any questions for me. This allows them to maybe speak up and address something that may not have been explicit before, or you may not have even been aware of. Like, someone who's having trouble hearing, or someone who's a little bit confused about when the tour is ending or stopping. You're going to be able to nip these things in the bud, but notice that this is part of a personalization. That is intention. We want to have this as a specific deliverable for every new trainee. Hey, are we checking in at the beginning and asking about how we can make this tour as exceptional as possible? How are we checking in midway through the tour at minimum, and obviously sticking around at the end to offer that final service? Another recommendation is to make sure that your tour leaders have a tour leading backpack that has all kinds of things that your guests might need. These can be anything from phone chargers to pens to paper to maps of the local area, handouts, props, visual aids, maybe some extra ponchos or an extra sweater or a small USB battery pack. Well, some guides or companies might think this is overkill. It's actually setting you up for success to deliver that personalized service, to solve a problem immediately and on the spot when one of your guests asks. Finally, if your tour leaders and experienced hosts are not taking the time to learn the names of the folks who are on your tour, we highly recommend you do so. To many people, the most wonderful sound in the universe is the sound of their own name. Taking the time to hone this skill is going to go a long way into making people feel like they're not just another face in the crowd, but hearing their own name, calling out that individual or drawing their attention to something specific goes a long way to creating that feeling of personalization. Now, for many tour business owners out there, you might be sitting there, my gosh, I wish my tour leaders would do all these things, but how do I actually get them to do that? And whether you're doing this with employees or contractors, you are ultimately the boss. You should lay out in specific detail the deliverables of any contract that you have with a tour leader. Be explicit about your expectations and deliverables for them fulfilling that contract. Build this into your training and your support documentation as well. Now, on the other side, sometimes it's a recruitment and hiring problem. If we have to turn over, get rid of some old guides who simply aren't following through on this new level of service or personalization. Maybe it's setting yourself up for success, where you have more qualified applicants, where you're able to take the cream off of the crop. Those speak more to recruiting and hiring challenges, which we also address in our coaching program. Look, I hope this video on personalization has given you some inspiration and you've gotten some best practices that you can incorporate. If you would like to speak to one of our tour and activity business coaches for a free strategy call, we'd love to share with you our full recruiting, hiring, and training resources. This is a framework that was put together by some extraordinarily successful tour and activity coaches who are responsible for hiring, training, recruiting some of the most incredible tour leaders on a planet. We want to get those best practices into your hands. Before you go, down below, let me know, what did we overlook? What type of personalization do you do on your tours or activities you could share with our community? Thanks so much for being here. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And of course, it means the world to us if you would share this with some of your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.